Pooka Pages, Lughnasadh issue, also known as Lammas, Festival of First Fruits, and the First Harvest. This is the first of the 3 harvest celebrations. The earth's bounty becomes ripe for gathering. The first loaves of bread are baked from this year's grains. Fruits are ready to be canned or made into pies and jams. The bounty of the vegetable garden is preserved to feed people during the coming winter months. In the midst of all this activity, people still find time to gather at county fairs that are today's versions of the ancient Lughnasadh festivals. The Storybook Chair. Elsie's Bread. After breakfast and a leisurely bath on the cottage steps, Pooka decided to check on his catnip patch. He'd almost reached it when a horrible noise stopped him on the graveled path. It was coming from the cottage behind him. Wait! Was that Elsie? Was his little witch hurt? The cat swiveled in his tracks and began racing back. He then slowed to a trot as his sharp ears began picking out words that were hiding behind the noise. At your festival sounds the horn, calling the people again. Child of barley corn, newly summer born, ripening like the grain. Pooka gave a sigh that was mostly of relief. Elsie was singing. Curious now, he continued to retrace his steps into the cottage and followed the noise toward the kitchen. He found the girl standing at the wooden table, her floured hands happily pushing, prodding, and kneading a large mound of smooth bread dough. The cat leaped onto the table. You're supposed to purr while doing that, he informed her. And you're doing it wrong. He flexed his claws, preparing to show her the correct way of kneading, the way all cats know instinctively from birth. I'm doing it right, Elsie told him loftily, and I prefer to sing. Whatever you want to call it, muttered the cat, shaking his ears. The witch's hands got still, and she glared down at him. What? Pooka cleared his throat. I said however you want to do it. The witch resumed her kneading, but one eyebrow rose skeptically. The cat needed a distraction. So, he said, that dough is going to make a lot of bread for our supper tonight. And then he added diplomatically, I love bread. His ploy worked. Elsie relaxed and chuckled. This bread is for the fair tomorrow. And so are those. She jerked her head toward the kitchen counters, lined with jars of herbed honeys, butters, jellies, and jams. Sally the flower lady and I are sharing a booth again this year. Where did those come from? Asked Pooka. They certainly hadn't been there while he was eating his breakfast. I've been making them all summer and storing them in the cellar, said Elsie proudly. The country fairs today are an echo of the big Taltiu fairs that were part of the Lughnasadh traditions of our ancestors. They celebrate the beginning of the harvest season. People come from miles around, even if they don't understand anymore exactly what they're celebrating or why. Well, but what about our own Lughnasadh ritual? Objected Pooka. Oh, we'll have that too. Pooka had more questions, but the kitchen was beginning to fill with the tantalizing aroma of baked bread. Elsie grabbed some pot holders and turned toward the oven. She pulled out several loaf pans and set them on the open windowsill to cool before shoving more into the oven. A tiny blur of wings appeared in the window. "What a lovely smell! Is it lunchtime already?" asked Thistle the fairy. Her little hands were clasped beneath her chin as she hovered over the bread. She was obviously waiting to be invited to stay. "No, these are for the fair tomorrow," said Pooka. "Elsie and the flower lady have a booth." The pixie's shoulders slumped. "Oh," she said. She then perked up and suggested, "Maybe I should test them for you. You want them to be top-notch for the fair, after all." "I'm pretty sure they're fine," grinned Elsie. "Leave them alone." Thistle pouted. She then found a perch on the shelf between the flour and sugar canisters. For the rest of the day, she watched as Elsie turned out loaves of all different sorts of delicious breads. As dusk turned the sky to violet, the fairy finally left, darting out the open window with a cheery wave. Pooka and Elsie settled down to their supper, a yummy stew with freshly baked bread. Elsie tidied the kitchen while Pooka perched at the table and worked on his magical lessons. Soon, it was bedtime. Pooka didn't know what woke him, but his head popped up, and his ears and his whiskers were suddenly alert. There it was, a noise downstairs. He glanced at his witch, snoring softly on her pillow. Okay, if it was a scary thing down there, she'd have woken. He slinked off the bed, down the stairs, and crept toward the kitchen. His excellent night vision didn't even need the moonlight pouring through the open window to see what was afoot. "Oh my gods and goddesses, this one is so good!" sighed little Thistle ecstatically. Her teensy cheeks were bulging as she chewed a morsel of Elsie's sweet blue cheese bread. Pooka looked around the kitchen. Every loaf had a tiny corner missing. "Thistle!" The fairy jumped, swallowed, and looked at him with wide, guilty eyes. "I'll have to tell Elsie," sighed the cat. Thistle's eyes got even bigger. "Oh, Pooks, do you have to? Maybe you could say that you were the one who tasted them. After all, I'm your friend." Pooka looked at her sternly. "But Elsie is my best friend, and what you did was wrong." The pixie hung her head. Her flaxen bangs covered her eyes, but not her red, guilty cheeks. "I know," she said, "but they were so yummy. As good as they smelled. I'm sorry." "Yeah, I get it," said Pooka, "but I still have to tell her if she notices." In the morning, Elsie did notice. "What happened to the corners of my loaves?" she exclaimed, looking around at all of them. Thistle decided to sneak in and sample them in the middle of the night," said the cat reluctantly. "Oh, Thistle," sighed Elsie, shaking her head. She looked around the kitchen at all the loaves of bread. "Well, I don't have time to make more. I'll just have to tell customers what happened and hope they don't mind." Her wagon was soon loaded. They had a quick breakfast and then headed through the forest, over the hills of the farmland, and toward the village. Edgar, Elsie's crow, flew overhead, cawing excitedly. "Caw, caw, caw!" He loved the fair, especially the kernels of popcorn that children tended to drop. As they arrived, colorful flags were already flying, the music was playing, and the games were starting. People began streaming through the entrance. Sally the flower lady had their booth already set up. She was hanging floral wreaths and setting out bags of potpourri and fragrant sachets. Elsie hurriedly began adding her own products. A couple of elderly women from a neighboring town appeared at the booth. "Look, Myrtle, lavender, honey, and fresh bread," said the taller one. Myrtle leaned over for a closer look. "The corner of the bread is missing," she frowned. "I'm sorry," said Elsie sadly from the other side of the counter. "I left the bread out to cool last night, and a fairy came and ate some." Myrtle raised a pair of glasses that were on a chain around her neck and perched them on her nose. "Every loaf has a corner missing," she observed. Elsie hung her head. Yes, the fairy decided to taste each one. Myrtle straightened up with a look of delight. "Flossie," she explained, "isn't that cute? This bread is fairy tested and approved. It must be good." Her taller friend moved in to see. "If that isn't just the sweetest advertising gimmick ever," Flossie exclaimed. "I'll take 3 loaves." Then she called out to a woman shopping at the next booth over. "Lucy, this girl says her bread is so good that the fairies nibbled on it during the night. You absolutely must get some." She wagged a teasing finger at Elsie. "Very clever, my dear." Word traveled through the fair, and by mid-morning, all of Elsie's bread loaves were gone. The little witch grinned at her cat. "Remind me to bake a loaf for Thistle when we get home," she said.